Well, how's everybody doing? Good, excellent. I am so glad to be here with you. Whether you're with us in the room right now, it is great to see you, or whether you are joining us live online right now on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend a few minutes with us today as we continue to unpack our series called In the Meantime, as we journey through the book of Daniel together. Now, for those of you that know me, you know that I'm a pretty easygoing person. It takes a lot to get me really frustrated and riled up, and I don't like conflict, like at all. Anybody else like me? Just really don't like it, and I kind of do what I can to avoid it. And sometimes I probably go a little bit too far, because I'll make myself uncomfortable so that other people will be comfortable. And you could call that people pleasing if you wanted, and that's probably true, at least to a certain extent. But there comes a point, there's a line, isn't there? Where you will come this far and you will come no further, and then we're about to fight. And one of those things for me is this: the Atlanta Braves are the worst. They're the worst. And you can't convince me otherwise. You know why? Because I grew up in Kentucky. I grew up a Reds fan, which isn't something that you really choose because they're terrible, but you're born into it, you know? And in the mid-'90s, the Braves would just beat the tar out of the Reds all the time, and it was infuriating. The only problem was my grandma, she was from Alabama, Roll Tide. Can I get somebody? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. She would come up. She was a huge Braves fan. So she would come up, and she would try to convert me away from Cincinnati into an Atlanta fan, and that just wasn't going to happen. And so we would go at it. We would fight about it. And one time, the fight got so bad, it ended with her chasing me. I promise this is true. She was chasing me around our basement with one of those foam tomahawks doing the war chant. For real. And to this day, I can't root for a team that does the tomahawk chop. I can't do it. I mean, I love Leslie and all that, but I can't root for Florida State. I can't root for any of these people because they do the tomahawk chop, therefore they are bad. You understand what I'm saying? It's amazing the things that become convictions in our lives, isn't it? You ever seen that Disney movie, Inside Out? They have these things, they call them core memories. And these are the things that shape your personality and the way that you interact with the world. And what I want to talk about today is similar to that, but a little bit different, because what they're actually mean, they're not core memories, they're convictions, aren't they? And they can be tied to memories, but it's your convictions that actually shape the way that you view the world and the way that you interact with it. Like I said a second ago, sometimes our convictions can be about some silly things, like what team is the best, or whether Star Wars is better than Star Trek, which it is, okay? And we could argue about that if you want. You can disagree with me, and I respect your right to be wrong, and that's fine. We can go on. We can still be friends. Maybe you don't care about either of those things. And you're like, what are we talking about? But I bet we could get a fight started in this room right now if I asked the question, what's the best truck that's ever been built? I know for a fact we could get a fight started in this room right now if I started talking about the fact that pineapple don't belong on pizza. I know we can, because we had this fight in our private Facebook group a few weeks ago, which was a fun time, by the way, wasn't it? That was a good time. And some things are just kind of silly, but we have a good time and we banter back and forth about it. And those are convictions, and that's fine. But when we drill past these surfacey kind of things, when we go a little bit deeper, we find out the core of who we are and our core convictions. And those are the things that truly, truly shape the way that we view the world and the way that we interact with it. And that's what I want to talk with you about today, because we've been building our core convictions our entire lives. And last week, we said, if you remember, that it's your choices, not your circumstances, that shape your character. You remember that? But I want to build on that today, and I want to show you that it's our character is revealed in crisis as we live out our convictions. You see what we did there? Our character, which is shaped by our choices, is revealed in our crisis as we live out our convictions. And, you know, when we face crisis, and we all do, we face crisis, and what we find out then, when life just really hits us hard, we find out if what we have are convictions or slogans. Because you won't sacrifice anything for a slogan, but you'll be willing to die for your convictions, won't you? You're willing to go to war over that. And when life really punches you in the face, you find out if you really believe what you say you believe. When you find out he's cheating on you, you find out, don't you? When you find out about the diagnosis, when you find out that you're about to lose your job in the middle of a pandemic and you're wondering how in the world am I going to feed my family, then you find out if you believe what you say you do. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but oftentimes when a crisis arises, a shortcut will come with it. Have you noticed that? And then you've got a choice to make. Will we take the shortcut, or are we going to hold true to our convictions? Will we take the shortcut? We're going to hold true to our convictions. Just as an example, when you find out he's cheating on you, do you cheat on him back because he had it coming and he deserved it? Or she? Or do you hold true to what you've always said you believe about the sanctity of marriage? When crisis comes, we find out if what we have are convictions or slogans. Now, we've been journeying through the book of Daniel together, and we've seen Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as we're going to refer to them today by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've seen them face all kinds of trials already, haven't we? We're barely into the 3rd chapter. They were 18 to 20 years old when they were ripped from their homelands, deported to Babylon, placed in 3 years of re-education camps. They were told they were going to be there for 70 years, basically, a life sentence, and they had to decide if they were going to trust God in the middle of the trial or not. And then last week we talked about this dietary dilemma that they faced where they were basically being force-fed food that had been sacrificed to idols, very likely, and was absolutely unclean and prohibited by the dietary laws of the Israelites. And they had to decide, were they going to allow their circumstance to dictate their choices, or were they going to make choices that would shape their circumstances? And today, what we're going to talk about, and I don't want to belittle what they did last week because this was a big deal. But if you'll pardon my phrase, today we're going to turn the heat up to 11, if you know what I'm saying. Because what they were about to face next was unlike anything they'd ever faced before. I don't know how much you know about Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, but this dude was outside of his mind. Okay, he built this giant golden statue of himself, by the way, and then he had musicians from all over the kingdom. At certain times of the day, they would play a song, and when you heard that song, you were supposed to bow down and worship the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And, oh, by the way, if you didn't, we would publicly execute you and burn you to death in the giant furnace. Sound good? Great. Does it get more egotistical than a giant statue, a theme song, and a death threat? I submit that it does not. Okay? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they found themselves right in the middle of this. And as we learned last week, at the very end, they were promoted in Babylon. They were rising through the ranks of the government. And how many of you know that as you start rising through the ranks of the government, you start making enemies? They were not the exception to this rule. There were people that were looking to get rid of them. And then they found their chance because Rakshak and Benny, for all of you VeggieTale fans out there, Rakshak and Benny, they were not bowing down. And word got back to King Nebuchadnezzar because they said, hey, these guys, they apparently don't respect you at all because they're not bowing down during your theme song. We just want you to know because we don't want you to be embarrassed or anything. And Nebuchadnezzar predictably lost it. Here's where we pick it up in Daniel chapter 3. It says this, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, my theme song, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? You got to have the crazy eyes when you say that. You know what I'm saying? But make no mistake about it, this was not an idle threat. This was master saying to slave, you will do what I tell you to do or I will kill you very, very publicly. There will be no consequences for me. There might be some for you, depending on what you do next. So what are you going to do? Here's what happened. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up. Now, this is a bold move, because Nebuchadnezzar ain't playing around. But they knew that trying to argue with him and reason with him was not going to be helpful. Because, first of all, anybody who says, you need to worship me or I'm going to kill you, it's going to be really hard to convince them that you don't need to worship them. Agreed? Secondly, Nebuchadnezzar would have been, much like most of the known world at the time, would have been polytheistic, which means he worshiped multiple gods. Okay, so the thought of not worshiping this God over here out of respect for this one over here, not even computing. Sometimes you're just better saving your breath. But this was a bold move, because maybe you've read this before, and so you know how it ends. But make no mistake about it, they didn't know how it was going to end. They didn't know if God was going to save them or not. And that's why they said, our God can save us if he wants to. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to serve you. We're going to worship your gods. It's not just not going to happen. Watch what happened next. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Now, this is the nightmare scenario, isn't it? Everything bad that could happen did happen here, because they just made a bold stand for God. Right? He's going to intervene, and he's going to save us. And now, wait a minute, we're tied up and we're getting carried off and thrown into something that would have looked like this. This is a lime kiln today, and this would have been something similar. This is obviously not the exact replica of what we're talking about here, but I wanted you to be able to see this so you can get this picture in your mind. And did you notice that they heated it so hot that the guards who tossed them in here died? There's no chance they're walking away from this. This is apparently the end. Yes, God can save us, but apparently he doesn't want to. But I guess here we go. And that's the end, right? No. Then Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed, and their robes were not scorched. There was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, comes a Nebuchadnezzar thing, man. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. You remember like 5 minutes ago when Nebuchadnezzar said, I'm going to kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. What God is going to save you from me? Isn't it great that he had to answer his own question? Isn't it great? Because the answer to the question, what God can save you from my hand, is the real one. The one who put you in place. The one who knit us together in our mother's womb. The one who gave us fire and everything that we have and can miraculously intervene when he wants to. That's the answer to the question. My God can save me and did save me from your hand. And then Nebuchadnezzar has to say, he's the real God. He's the only one that can save in this way. And in spite of all that, it took some courage for them to say this to Nebuchadnezzar, didn't it? Because, again, not to belittle what we talked about last week, but It's one thing to say, I'm not going to eat that no matter what you say. It's another thing to say, I'm not bowing down even if you chuck me in that furnace over there. That takes something, doesn't it? Where does that come from? Let me show you this. Their convictions gave them the courage to face the crisis. Their convictions, what they knew that they knew that they knew, gave them the courage to face the crisis. The same is true for you. You've heard it said that you can learn a lot about people when you see them going through something really hard. When you see somebody going through crisis, you can learn a lot about them, can't you? You know why? Because your character is revealed through crisis. But let me tell you, it's your convictions that guide you through it. Your character is revealed through crisis, but it's your convictions that guide you through it. You know why? Because that's the only thing you've got left in that moment. Because so often when we find ourselves in the middle of crisis, we feel alone, don't we? We feel abandoned by God. We feel like this is it. This is the end. I'm not living in the meantime, waiting on a brighter day and a brighter future. I'm living in the end times because this is it for me. This is the end. It's over. Maybe you felt like that before. Maybe you feel like that right now. And if you do, I want to just speak to you for a moment. And I want to encourage you that you're not the only one. You're not the only one that feels that way today. You're probably not the only one in this room that feels that way. Whether you're in this room where we are together, or whether you're joining us online, you're probably not the only one in the room that feels that way. And you're in good company. Because you remember King David, like Goliath killing David? You remember him? If you've ever read the Psalms, you know that about half of them are David going, God, when are you going to come save me from this mess? Why have you left me out here all alone by myself? When are you going to come fix the problem? You remember Elijah called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel? Huge victory. Seems like about 15 minutes later, he's in a cave begging God to kill him because he's the only one who loves God. You remember that conversation? You remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross? What did he say? My God, why have you forsaken me? You're not the only one who's ever felt abandoned by God. But what do you do? Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm not the only one that feels that way, but I still feel that way. So what do I do when I find myself in that moment? You rely on your convictions. Whether you realize this is what you're doing or not, you rely on your convictions to guide you through those moments. So let me ask you, what are yours? What are your core convictions? What are the things that you know that you know that you know? While you're thinking about that, let me give you a couple of mine. There is one God. One. There's only one. Jesus came and gave his life so that we could have forgiveness for the sin in our lives. That's why Jesus came. He came so that we could have forgiveness of the sin in our lives. And if you don't know how to get access to that forgiveness, I would love to talk with you about what that means. If you're with us in the room, I want you to take a look right over this way. Right under this screen right here, I'm going to be standing right under that screen after service today. I would love to talk with you about how to take your next step of faith, whether it's becoming a Christian for the very first time, or whether it's something else. Please don't let this moment pass you by. If you're joining us online and you obviously can't walk underneath that screen, take a minute. Don't skip this now. Take a minute and email us at hello, as in hi, hello, at SwissCoveChristian.com. We want to help you take your next step of faith because Jesus came and gave his life so that we could have forgiveness for the sin in ours. And it's only through the grace of God that I have a relationship with him. I owe him everything. And conversely, he owes me nothing. But he will never leave me or forsake me, even when I feel alone. I'm not. Will somebody say that last part with me really quick? Even when I feel alone, I'm not. One more time. Even when I feel alone, I'm not. I want you to let that sink down deep in your soul today. Rest in the knowledge that even when you feel alone, you're not. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had to decide if they were going to live their convictions or if they were going to cave. And this is the same choice that you have to make today. But you know what I've learned is that it's really difficult to live convictions that you haven't named. So a couple of weeks ago, I asked you to write down the reasons that you trust God. And we said the reason we want you to do that is if you'll list the ways that God has been faithful to you in the past, you'll see your trust in Him in the present begin to grow, and that trust will carry you into the future, the things that you're going to face. Today, I want you to take some time and write down what are your core convictions, the non-negotiables in your life that you know, that you know, that you know. And today, at 1 o'clock in our private Facebook group, this question is going to pop up. What are your core convictions? Take some time. Write out 2 or 3. Write out many more for yourself. Because these are the things that are going to guide you when it all seems like it's falling apart. So take the time and name your convictions and surround yourself with people who share those convictions. Because I know that we think that we can just do this. I'm an island. I'm a rock. I can do this on my own. But listen to me. Remember a couple days ago in our Bible in a Year app, we just read, God said, it is not good for man to be alone, didn't we? Just a couple days ago. You weren't meant to do life or faith alone, so don't. Surround yourself with people who share your convictions. This is what happened in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's life, isn't it? They knew what they believed, and they were surrounded by people who shared those beliefs. This past week on Instagram stories, Perry Noble said this: there are 2 kinds of people, those who throw you in the fire and those who go into it with you. Come on, somebody. 2 kinds of people, those who throw you into the fire and those who go into it with you. You have both of these people in your life right now, don't you? Now let me tell you something. Whether or not you cave under the pressure or you live your convictions is largely going to depend on which one of those voices is loudest in your life. Who do you allow to speak into you? People who say, I don't even know why you're doing what you're doing. Or people who say, I know it's hard, but you're not alone. I'm going to walk with it through you, and our God is going to walk with us every step of the way. This is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew. They knew that just because God was silent didn't mean that He was absent. That just because they were going through something horrific didn't mean that God had left them. And because they were willing to live their convictions, Nebuchadnezzar got to see a miracle of God, didn't he? And no, he didn't convert to Judaism. If you've read the book of Daniel, you know that he didn't. But even Nebuchadnezzar was forced to admit, this is the one true God. And it would never have happened had they caved to the pressure. So what I want you to remember is this: our crisis can reveal Christ in us. Our crisis can reveal Christ in us. And it doesn't mean that everybody around us is going to become a Christian because we walk through the fire, so to speak. But I know this: the power of God has been most evident in my life when I needed His power to get me through the day. Anybody else? If you'll live your convictions, people are going to start to take notice. They're going to ask you questions like, hey, how are you doing what you're doing? How are you walking with such confidence and such courage in the face of a world that seems to be falling apart all around you? And when that question comes, you'll be able to say, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know that my God will be with me every step of the way. And even if He doesn't save me from this, I'm going to give Him glory anyway. Anybody else feeling that this morning? Would you stand with us now? May we take our cue from Daniel, from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You remember when Paul wrote to the Philippians, and he said, I don't know if I'm going to live or die, but I know that for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. May we take our cue from them. May we be able to add our names to that list, because we know we can trust God in the trial because He got there before we did, and He's already working it for your good.